Very nice to see everyone here this afternoon, and we're having a very special week. We have one of the great privileges of universities is that we have an opportunity to interact with some of the most interesting people in the world. They come to our community and share the things that they do in their lives. And so we had a very interesting evening with Jane Goodall, who came on Tuesday night to talk about some things that she's done. And then today we have Temple Grandin, one of the most influential and interesting people in the world today. As Jan was introducing me, she's mentioned that I had a long career in health sciences. And one of the things that I remember as an ophthalmologist was that I dealt with people who had a variety of levels of visual disability. What I noticed, though, is that given a certain level of vision, how the person conducted his or her life could vary all the way across the map, from people who allowed something that was in their way or a particular challenge to stop them from moving forward, to people who really would overcome that and be inspiring in the way that they contributed even more than a person without that particular special characteristic might move. A story that means a lot to me is one of the first patients I saw, a woman who I remember seeing on Thanksgiving because I'd seen her the day before, and she lived near where we were having dinner the next day, so I was able to meet her at a local hospital and introduce myself and have them let me use a machine, even though I was just the resident. It was great fun. So she was actually my first patient because she stayed with me through residency and then in my practice. Also, I saw my last day of practice when I closed to come here in 2005. During that time, her vision went from poor to worse to almost nothing. But she worked throughout all those years as a loan officer, using a magnifying glass and taking the documents home at night to show that something that would have stopped so many people, really, which is something to motivate her to work harder and do a better job. And it's so important for us to be able to motivate people like that. Temple Grandin, let me say a word about you before you rise to the front. I was going to say a few words. So Temple Grandin is well known to everyone in this audience as the world's foremost advocate for autism and autism spectrum of disorders, showing how things that make us special are things that we can use to change the world in ways that we might not otherwise do that. She's also one of the world's foremost advocates for the appropriate and positive treatment of animals, and has really changed the way the entire industry of food processing handles animals in a way that makes it better for everyone involved. And it's been many of the things that she learned growing in her life allow her to be able to approach these problems in ways that everyone else had not approached them and have made a real challenge. So it's a privilege and a pleasure for me to be able to welcome to the chair Professor Temple Grandin. I have a couple of things that I'm interested in I'd love to hear. So you're an incredibly successful advocate as you move around. How much time do you spend traveling and on the road working on these various
I'm spending
issues?
about 90% of my time on the road right now. And autism would totally take over if I let it, but I'm not going to let it. I'm a college professor. I teach animal behavior classes. I teach animal welfare auditing classes 3 times a year, and I'm not going to give those up. And people have said to me, would you like to snap your fingers and not be autistic? And I go, no, I like the logical way I think. But on the other hand, the professors and the animal science comes first, and the autism second. One thing I'm getting concerned about is people are becoming their label. Yes, I also have sciatic nerve back problems. I don't think I want to come and say, well, I want to tell you all about my sciatica. That's the first thing I'm going to tell you about. That doesn't define who I am.
Right. And when you travel around, I know you spend your time consulting with
Yep.
the industry, you spend your time giving book tours and talks, and spend your time with politicians and other leaders. How is that time split? Is it predominantly one or the other?
Well, I'm trying to keep it so that the animal stuff is still at least half of what I do. So, because I'm seeing too many young kids today, they'll walk up to me at a book table and all they want to do is talk about their autism. And I'd rather have them tell me about their science project, or they want to become a history professor, some other kind of thing. The problem you've got with autism is it's such a wide spectrum, just like eye problems.
Yes.
You can have just a little bit of eye problems, or you can be totally blind. In fact, when I was in graduate school, I had a blind roommate. At one end of the autism spectrum, you got half of Silicon Valley. Einstein had autism. Steve Jobs is probably on the spectrum. Well, you need to read the Steve Jobs Memorial Business Week magazine. There's an article in there. They'll say, yeah, he's on the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody who's not going to be going to college. And I think a lot of special educators really know how to deal with the more severe kids, but they don't know what to do with the smart geeks. Yes. What you need to be showing the smart geeks is all the stuff you got over there in the 3D printing lab. That is just so cool. I got a little Cam the Ram logo they made for me over there. But you got to get kids, show kids interesting stuff like that so they get interested in interesting stuff. Because people on the spectrum tend to get fixated. I got fixated on cattle chutes. Well, I ended up designing them. Half the cattle in this country, when they go to a meat plant, they're handled in a piece of equipment I designed called the center track restrainer system. And that's pretty good for somebody they thought was mentally retarded.
I think it's...
just like your loan officer that was using the magnifying glass.
Yes, yes. Well, I think it's actually very good. So tell us a little bit about growing up. Kids with autism sort of present relatively early, and so your parents had challenges. And how was that for you when you were a young child?
Well, I had severe autism when I was a young child. I had no speech until age 4, and I was the kind of kid that used to just put away in institutions. You know, where the Asperger kid, the milder autism, they usually have no speech delay. They were just called geeks and nerds before. Most of those had a hard time, a rough time, but managed to get employed. Fortunately, I got very good educational intervention. You know, the worst thing you can do a little autistic kid is to do nothing with them, and mother could see that I was progressing. Now, one advantage growing up in the 50s is kids were taught to shake hands. They were taught table manners. These things were taught in a very systematic way, and that really helps the autistic kid because social is not instinctual. They've got to learn it. Because I'm seeing young kids, a lot less severe than me, they come up to me and they stick their left hand out. They don't know how to shake hands. You got to demonstrate to them. You got to just show them.
What kind of things worked for you? We have you know, a great interest in this region on the things that we can do to help families and young kids with autism as they're moving forward. Were there things that were particularly helpful to you, or things that people tried that were particularly harmful or
well,
didn't
things
work?
that were really helpful to me were all the hands-on classes we had in school. I think it's terrible. They've taken out all the cooking, the sewing, the wood shop, metal shop, art, because those hands-on classes, those things became the basis of my career. We need those hands-on things because you can't do practical problem solving. I was over at the 3D printer lab and they were telling me about engineers that don't know how to use a drill press. Well, I learned how to use a drill press when I was 14. You know, you need to be doing those kinds of things. And there's some kids where four-year college or PhD is an appropriate career. There's others where a 2-year community college degree would be appropriate. Right now in this country, we have a shortage of auto mechanics, diesel mechanics, and electricians. Also certified welders and techs to work in the oil industry. And then we also have a shortage of electrical and computer science and US-born engineering students for things like spy satellites and the defense industry. Great jobs, really neat thing. It'll be the next Google Maps someday in the future. We're not getting enough of our geeks and our nerds going into these things.
Yes. You know, I heard something interesting about, you mentioned sort of vocational training and things that we might do, and I was meeting with politicians talking about community colleges, and I was in my group were people who were from the community colleges, and there were people from a welding program, and they said, we have a very low percentage of people who finish our welding program. Many start, but only about 10% finish the welding program.
And what's their problem?
And so the problem, interestingly, was they all got jobs before they finished the year. So what was happening is that the demand, in fact, it was not a bad outcome. There was such demand for people to learn these skills that as soon as they got the skills, they got hired. So it showed there was really a great demand for technical skills.
Oh, well,
in
definitely.
places.
And you know, the thing is, all these tech people are retiring.
Yes.
And these are good jobs. I mean, some kids, the skilled trades. I'm not talking about plasterboard or laying floor tiles or something like that. But the highly skilled trades, working in the meat industry, I've worked with a lot of these millwrights that are just brilliant. And then I draw the drawings and they build my designs. And these are smart people. You know, stupid people can't do the kind of work those millwrights do.
We grew up in a similar time, and I know that when I was in school, we had wood shop and metal shop,
Oh,
and
we
in fact you'd progress through, and so you had to make things with your hands. I still have a bowl I made many years ago, which is great fun. As you were going through school, did you think much about your future? I mean, were you planning on college all along, or how did you?
Well, I was a horrible student. I was bullied and teased in high school. I got kicked out of a large girls' school for throwing a book. Fortunately, I wasn't drugged to death with too many drugs, and that's happening with kids. There's a place of medication. I take some antidepressants for anxiety, and they saved me. But the thing that got me turned around in high school was my science teacher. And I'm really concerned that we don't have enough science teachers, because I saw interesting things. And what I really liked about the HBO movie is they showed my projects. I actually built that optical illusion room, the gate you could open up in my car, those dip vats. My drawings were shown in the movie. You've got to show kids in high school interesting stuff, like that 3D printer lab.
Yes.
So they're going to find out there's more in this world than video games and sports, that there's all kinds of fascinating stuff. And the thing about the kind of autistic kids, the dyslexic, the ADHD kids, they tend to get fixated on stuff. Well, let's get them fixated on 3D printers, because that's the kind of thing that can turn into really good careers.
Yes. You know, I bet you many people in the audience have not had the opportunity to see the 3D printer. So maybe you could say a word about that.
Well, they gave me a little thing that a 3D printer made. This thing moves, and it was printed. A computer program was written to make this thing, and then it's put in this machine, and it makes this thing that moves. And I'm going, wow. Then they had another one that used regular HP printer heads to make some other things that didn't move. But it's, you know, you've got to get kids. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there, but you've got to show it to kids.
Yes.
Well, what's interesting, okay, this in itself doesn't look that interesting, but when you see how it was made, I'm going, you made that in little bits of plastic, that it actually moves. That's the thing that impressed me. You got to show kids interesting stuff. Maybe they need to find out that drilling rigs have joysticks too. So maybe you're going to have to do something. You know, Sunday afternoon, we take the 12-year-old out there, we make sure nothing happens, the suits are gone, and we show him the control room of a drilling rig. You know, just a single visit like that can get a kid turned on and motivating studying. I talked to a lot of low-income folks, and it's a shop teacher that turned a kid around. Now he runs a maintenance shop at a major meat plant.
So when you were going through high school, then you got interested, and you had a teacher who turned you around, or showed you a pathway. Was it a man or a woman? Could you say something about it? It
was an ex-NASA space scientist. His name was Mr. Carlock. He got an honorary doctorate for the movie. Okay. And I decided there was one thing in the script that was not going to get corrected, because I did notice that mistake, and I just left it there. And he was one of these creative kind of guys, you know, and I got all fixated on my squeeze machine, and he says, well, you want to find out why it relaxes you? Then you're going to have to study the scientific literature. In other words, tap into the fixation. Well, back in those days, we had no copying machines, and you had to look up the abstracts and write them on recipe cards and put them in a recipe box. It was a lot of work in those days to review the scientific literature. But you see, you can tap into that drive of that motivation and get it going into something that can become a career.
And did he help you then with the next stage, going on to college?
Yes, he did. And one thing that was really good is even after I went to college, the college was in the same town, and I could still visit with my science teacher. Because I had a hard time in college with socially, it was like really bad. There was still some teasing, and the only places where I did not have teasing was shared interests. High school, it was horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. And when I was in college, I got together with another guy that I'm pretty sure was on the spectrum, and we were Monadnock Rangers CB Club. And he actually seeked me out. And but those are the places where I had friends, and I was not teased.
So when did your interest in animals start, or how do you remember the early days of that and how it progressed?
That big interest was when I went to a special boarding school after I got thrown out of 9th grade, and they had a stable. And that's where all the horseback riding and everything started. I was absolute horse nut. The cattle stuff started when I went out to my aunt's ranch when I was 15. And I was scared to go to my aunt's ranch. And mother says, well, you can go for 1 week or all summer. She wasn't going to let me not go. You got to stretch these kids. You can't just force them into stuff, but you got to stretch them. And if you don't stretch them, they're not going to develop. they've also got to learn how to work. I have a book called Different Not Less, and it's old Asperger's of all different levels, from low-level jobs to high-level jobs, that had jobs all their life. Got diagnosed later in life because their relationships were a mess. And one of the things that made them successful in their jobs is they just about all had paper routes. Well, we need to be creating some new paper route substitutes, like walking dogs, make greeting cards and sell them, working in a farmer's market, maintain a community website. Kids need to learn work skills. Now, I had a lot of work skills on my aunt's ranch. I did a sewing job when I was 13, taking care of horse stalls and cleaning them out every day. I had an internship at a research lab in college because I'm seeing too many kids that are kind of different graduating from college and they haven't learned one work skill. I think that's a serious problem.
And so your interest in animals wasn't really so much through pets and those kind of relationships. It was really through the animals in their element in the agriculture world. The horses for riding, and then the cows at your aunt's. So when you went on to college, did that interest maintain? Or,
well, I also was fascinated by optical illusions. And I thought originally I wanted to become an experimental psychologist and study things like optical illusions. And I actually went 1 year towards a master's in psychology, which was a disaster, and I switched over to animal science. But my knowledge of optical illusions helped me because I noticed the cattle would see a shadow and they'd stop. So I'd get down in the chutes and see the stuff the cattle were seeing, and people thought that was just crazy. But you know, if you get rid of those distractions, then the cattle would walk right up the chute. So my optical illusion training, you know, kind of helped me in my work, and then I got my career started, one little job at a time, writing articles for the Farmer Ranchman magazine. And the other thing is, when you're a weird geek, you got to have a good portfolio. And the way I sold jobs was showing off my drawings. I remember going to an agricultural engineering meeting very early in my career. No one wanted to talk to me. And then I whipped out one of my big drawings. And I go, oh, wow, you made that? Now, today, you could put your portfolio on your phone. It could be computer programs, it could be drawings, it could be artwork, it could be a sample of some of your writing. It could be a lot of different things because you always have that phone because you never know who's going to be the person that can open up the door. And you know, forget the front door interviews. We got to find back door. And the other thing is, don't put any weird stuff on your Facebook page. Just don't. Don't.
Okay. I want to see you taking notes on that one. I think that's a very important thing. I want to talk about the recent past a bit, but just going back again to the 50s and growing up. Actually, I've been thinking about this. I had a high school reunion just over the weekend, and so I saw people I'd known since I was 8 or 9 or 10 years old, and they're now much older than I am. Yep. It was interesting to see. But it was fun to sort of see how they'd progressed through their lives. And in the 50s, when you were diagnosed as being, at least in some ways different, certainly, how did your parents approach that, and where did they go for help?
Well, fortunately, when I was very young, when I was 2.5, I went to a neurologist in Boston named Bronson Crothers. They checked me for epilepsy. That was negative. They checked me for deafness, and she referred my mother to a little speech therapy school that 2 teachers ran out of the basement of their house. And they had a couple of Down syndrome kids in that. And they were these good older teachers, and they were doing the same treatments they do today. There was just Miss Reynolds' speech therapy class in her basement. And then when I was 3, my mother hired a nanny, and I think she was on the spectrum. And she actually was a Juilliard-trained engineer. And not Juilliard, Juilliard-trained musician. Sorry, I'm getting engineering on my mind right now. And she, mother said everything she played sounded like John Philip Sousa. But she played constant turn-taking games with me and my sister because you got to teach these little kids how to take turns. They're really awful about taking turns. But then I had a normal 50s upbringing, you know, played with other neighborhood kids, we built stuff, and where things really went up on the rocks was puberty. That was the worst part. Teenagers' life, terrible. There's some kids that are kind of different. I think they need to skip that and go from being a child right straight into being a grown-up because socializing with teenagers is not a social skill that I need.
I understand. I worry about it a lot. You have had the, well, I have two questions. One is that and I'm thinking about one of our professors. I'm looking out and I see a part of a building that's named after one of our professors who passed away recently, who won a Nobel Prize, a man named Rowland. And so he developed, he learned something really important about the way the world worked. and the way that the ozone layer was being depleted by chlorofluorocarbons, and learned that chemically. And that was a fascinating thing for him to learn. That was in the 1970s. He then spent 10 years teaching other people what he'd learned, with a great push from the industry to not cooperate. And so, and then the industry changed, and it's changed and helped the world. And in a parallel with your life, you learned things about how animals were being treated that might be not the best way. But then you had to influence people to change the way that they were behaving. How did you go about doing that?
Well, this is where this kind of single-mindedness of purpose can be helpful. I had to learn how to be more diplomatic. You know, again, you just couldn't call everybody stupid. You see, when I was real young, I didn't know that most people didn't think in pictures the way I did. So they designed something wrong, and I would say, well, that's stupid. Now I'm realizing that maybe the mathematical mind that thinks differently than the picture mind, and the mathematical mind may not see things I see, but I'm terrible in math. This is where you need the industrial designer like me working with the mathematical mind, just like Steve Jobs and the engineers and the phone. And when I found out why the Japanese nuclear power plant blew up, I just couldn't believe it. They made a mistake that a visual thinker like me would never make. I can't design a nuclear reactor, I wouldn't even try. But I wouldn't put the generators that run the emergency cooling pumps in a basement next to the sea that's not waterproof. Because when the tsunami came over the top of the seawall, the generators ended up being underwater, plus all the electrical apparatus for the pumps, and everything else is history. It doesn't run underwater. And as I've been looking at different kinds of thinking, the mathematics mind thinks in a more abstract visual spatial way, and they just didn't see it. So maybe I need to be doing the safety systems, because I can visualize every possible way I can break the thing. And I can't design it against deliberate sabotage, but I can design it against, you know, tsunami coming in there, somebody pushing the wrong button stupidly, those sort of things.
So did the industry, when you first came with your drawings and your ideas, how did they receive you?
Actually, I found selling the thing actually was quite easy. Selling them the corral system design, that wasn't hard. The thing that was hard was getting them to operate it right. Half my clients tore up the equipment and wrecked it. Too often people think if they buy the magic new thing, that's going to solve all their problems. You know, and then I started training people how to operate it correctly, and then they lapsed back into bad methods. So then I started training managers, because management's got to make people do things right. Then in 1999, I got to train the McDonald's auditors. And after they kicked a couple of meatpacking plants off the approved supplier list, they started doing things right. You see, because a big customer had the economic power to really make them change. And if you want to see how one of my systems works, I do have a video. You can go on YouTube. It's Temple Grandin Beef Plant Video Tour.
Okay. And so many of the biggest processors of cattle, McDonald's and other chains, Burger King, I think, things like that, use your methods. How did you first get introduced to those huge corporations, and how was that?
Well, there was a thing on the internet called the McLibel suit, England, where some activist groups wrote some bad things about McDonald's in a brochure. They sued them, and the activists, with no lawyer, won half the lawsuit. So now McDonald's was forced to look at the issue, and they hired me. And it was very interesting watching this welfare issue go from an abstraction that you delegate to lawyers and PR, go to something real. Because when I took them out to farms and plants, you know, truth's always somewhere in the middle on these issues, and the internet tends to magnify the radical stuff. And when they saw something wrong, they go, oh boy, that's something we really need to fix. And then something else would be pretty good, they go, well, that's not so bad. And to watch it become a real issue. And then the food safety team just grabbed a hold of it, and the tipping point tipped in 1999. And there's been a whole lot of improvements compared to the 80s and the early 90s. It's a big improvement. Now there's some bad videos here from California. Yeah, dairy cows. People bring dairy cows into plants that are half dead. They should not be doing that. And there's still things that need to be improved, but compared to the 80s and the early 90s, it's vastly improved.
And how about monitoring? You know, when you're there, or the auditor teams are there, I'm sure that people behave at their very best, but you're not there all the time. So how do you make sure that when we're not looking, good things?
Well, the thing that's really interesting is that in the first year that we started, they do bad stuff in front of you because they didn't know any better. Then once they learned they shouldn't do bad stuff in front of you, then they act good in front of you. So how do you deal with it? Well, the Cargill Corporation and the JBS, two of our biggest companies, have got video auditing, where auditors over the internet can tune in to the plant at any time. And that solves the problem of the bad behavior when the back is turned, because the back is never turned then. And to make the video work, it has to be audited by an outside company. Just internal cameras don't work. The novelty wears off and they don't look at them seriously.
If you were, something else that I was thinking about is you sort of look at the effects of what you've done by measuring different outcomes and things. So,
well, we measure outcomes. I'm not going to tell them how to design a plant, but let's take in beef, for example. You know, they have a captive bolt gun that they kill the beef with, and when we first started, they had broken equipment all over the place. It was just a mess, poor cattle. And to pass the audit, they've got to shoot 95% on the first shot, make them dead on the first shot, and then have nothing live hanging up on a rail. No more than 3 cattle out of 100 mooing in the kill box area. Well, that used to be 20 and 30% mooing. Cattle falling down all over the place. You're not allowed any more than 1%. It used to be 500% zapping them with electric prods. One excellent score, it's no more than 5%. And I've got a paper up on the internet that I did for a journal called Animal Welfare on developing auditing systems. Easy way to find that is tune up Google Scholar, set it for 2012 and put T. Grandin in there. You'll find that paper, and it goes through 10 years worth of data. The thing is looking at outcomes. I think we need to be doing that in education. What is our main purpose of education? Well, so students can get good jobs. Let's look at high school education. Get a good education, stay out of trouble with the law, get and keep decent jobs, have a family. That's ultimately what we should be doing. And some people would be a 2-year community college job would be appropriate. Another one, it might be a 4-year college, or maybe someone else gets a medical degree or something like that. But we need to be getting people, we need to be looking at the outcome. And if I had to measure only 2 things, it would be stay out of trouble with the law, other than a tiny bit of traffic violations, and get and keep decent jobs. You know, so you can go above at least an entry-level job.
I believe what you said. I think a few minor traffic violations are really the mark of a good person.
Well,
so.
yeah, yes, we've all had those.
No one in particular. Yeah. We want to have some time for questions from the group. I have just 1 or 2 more that I'm curious about. So unlike the rest of us, you've had a movie made about your life, and that was must have been quite an interesting experience. How was that experience? It
was like going in the weird 60s and 70s time machine. Claire Danes became me. The producer of the movie was the mother of an autistic child, Emily Gerson-Sains. And you know, when you have the right team, things just work. I thought they did a great job on the movie. It has motivated a lot of kids. You can get DVDs off of Amazon. Then I got a really cool commentary track where I talk about autism, and I talk about cattle a lot too. And I've gotten a lot of letters and a lot of emails from kids, and I hope it inspires some of these kids that are quirky and different to get some of these labels. I'm getting worried now. I mean, we're going to label kids like oppositional defiant and conduct disorder. I mean, those are medical diagnoses? You as an eye doctor, you must be about throwing up over that. See, the problem you've got with a lot of those labels is it's a mixture of some diagnoses that are based in science along with piles of insurance codes.
I would say I throw up over many things that in the world these days, and that's one of them. Particularly, I think people who are categorized by these labels, and then one decides that after you've done the categorization, you're done, you know, and there's nothing else to do.
Well, the thing that worries me is I see a smart 10-year-old kid that's much less severe than me. I see a teenager that comes up to me that's much less severe than me. And all he wants to talk about is autism. That like totally becomes him. I don't want to just talk about sciatica all day. Yes, I do have sciatica. I do exercises every single night. Dr. Google has great exercises. But that doesn't define who I am. And this is what worries me. Especially, then I go up to things like the Minnesota State Science Fair, and you've got probably half the kids in there had some Asperger's, maybe about 1/4 of them are diagnosed. I notice a lot of techies kind of avoid the labels like the plague. You see the thing, when the kids are young and they're really severe, they need the labels to get the services. And we got a lot of severe kids. See, the problem you've got with the whole autism thing is half the kids are really super severe and they need tons of services. They're not going to be coming here. And this is the problem you have. It's a continuum. It's a continuous trait, from Einstein and Steve Jobs down to somebody that's definitely not going to be here. But if they get the right services, they can maybe live independently and do a simple job.
Before my last question, I guess, before we open up, if you kind of think of the things that are there now in front of you, what change would you like to see? Where are you going these next couple of years?
Well, I want to communicate with young people. You know, I've done a lot of talks like the one I'm going to be doing on this campus because I want to help young people to succeed. I have people who have come up to me in the airport and said, my kid went to college because of your book. I had a wife come up and they said, now I understand my engineer husband after I read your book. I want to see a lot of the kids that are kind of different succeed. And I think that's really an important thing. Also, I'm going to continue on with my cattle work. I'm still going to be teaching my class. I've got graduate students. Just had a graduate student finish up a paper on different calf defense patterns in mama cows out on a ranch. So I'm still doing my animal research too, and I'm going to keep doing that. And I have no intention of retiring. And when I went back to my class reunion, I couldn't believe how all my classmates had retired. I'm at retirement age now, and I got no intention of retiring. I'd probably die of boredom.
Yes. I'd say I noticed how many of my classmates had retired, and so many of them were so old. I wanted them to...
I couldn't believe how old some... I go back to my college reunion, and this guy picks me up, and he's got a big fat belly and gray hair, and he says, I am, and I'm not going to say his name. I don't want to embarrass him. He says his name, and when I was in college, he was the big man on campus. And I didn't recognize him. I don't know, they all looked ancient.
Don't know what happened to them.
Yeah.
We have time for a few questions. Might we have none planted in the audience? So
if you don't have a question, we're going to pick somebody.
Yeah.
Because I find that sometimes you have to do that.
Yeah. Pick them, have them come and stand in front of us and ask a question.
All right, let's, well, I see somebody with an orange coat. I tend to be attracted to the bright colors. Do you have a question?
Let's see. I guess I'm curious what you were saying about people working with their hands. That's something that's been on my mind recently because of the issue we have in the States of our manufacturing industries going away. So I wonder if you've been asked to comment on that issue to policymakers or if you've made...
See, well, the manufacturing industry going away. Now, there's starting to be a little trend of it coming back because the wages are going up in China. And the fuel cost to ship all the containers over here, that's going up. One of the things I think is really important for a lot of educators, I think you need to subscribe to some business magazines so that you learn things like the fact that the wage rates are going up in China. They had a riot at the Foxconn factory that makes Apple stuff. You know, things are changing. But I also was very disturbed that the head of 3M, you know, this was written up in the Wall Street Journal, said that he had to offshore some research and development because there wasn't enough interest in science in this country. And 3M has a huge outreach program to schools. And I think too many of the smart, geeky kids are getting some kind of label, and they don't have a shop teacher anymore to turn them around, or a science teacher to turn them around. And we're not developing enough of our own people. If you take that dual major, computer science, electrical engineering, oh, that's hot right now. You'll get hired. Yeah?
Can you recommend a good magazine that covers developments in scientific research?
Well, there's different kinds of things. I mean, I subscribe to Science and Nature. I like to go across disciplines. So, I mean, I get the Journal Animal Science, I get Beef Magazine. I also get, on the airport, I read Business Week, Wired, Technology Review, because I got to know what's going on in tech, read the general news magazines. I just read all kinds, different kinds of stuff. But if you kind of want to keep up in business, in what's going on in the tech field, Business Week, Wired, and Technology Review, that's how I learned a lot of stuff about the oil industry and some of their technologies and how they work. You know, so you just kind of know what's out there. But I think a lot of educators need to be looking at some business magazines. I think Business Week is just wonderful. It's such a combination of really stupid things like gourmet dog food tests paired with the finest wine and really serious articles about you know, what's going on in business. because I think, I think educators need to get across fields. They tend to just be in their rut. And a lot of educators that are working with young kids today don't know anything about the business, what kind of stuff's available out there. They wouldn't have any idea what 3D printing is. What field are you in? You're an anthropologist, okay?
You mentioned today and you've written about that people think differently. You think in pictures and some maybe math people think in more concepts. Do you think there's a benefit for children and teenagers to somehow be aware of how they think and do some sort of introspection to know how their brain actually
It was, when I was a very young child, the question was, about the different kinds of thinking. I didn't know that other people were not visual thinkers. And when mistakes were made on jobs, I used to think it was due to stupidity. It's due to they think differently. It's been very, very interesting to me looking at the different kinds of thinking. If I ask you to think about a church steeple, I was shocked that a lot of people get kind of a vague, generalized thing. I just see specific pictures, and the mathematician might get this sort of vague motion of people swaying and singing and stuff like that. There's different kinds of minds. Now, most people are a mixture, but people that have some kind of a label tend to have really uneven skills. But I'm finding now, like in a lot of my books, I've used a co-writer. I have a co-writer because I'm not good at organization, because I'm an associational thinker. So then I have to try to figure out, the thing I've learned with the co-writers, I can't dump too much stuff on them all at once. But Richard, we're working on a new book right now on the autistic brain, and we're going to be getting deep into the different kinds of thinking. And Richard's just, he's organized some of the stuff in just wonderful ways. But I found I couldn't just throw too much stuff at him all at once. My mind tends to associate, but then it's my mind that finds all the cool stuff to give him. But he's going to put it in a format that's going to be a lot more readable.
We still have yes?
Is there something about being on the autism spectrum that lends itself to being able to take the perspective of an animal?
Well, the only reason why I take the perspective of an animal is I don't think in language. An animal is a sensory-based thinker. It's going to be pictures, sounds, touch sensations. And the thing with people with autism and animals, there's some of them where they're like instantly best buddies with the dog, and there's others where that's not true. There's a lot of variation. You see, and then one kind of person on the spectrum, they tend to love history and they like words. One thing on the spectrum we've had problems with is really vile views on radical politics or religion. Let's get rid of that stuff. That does not make you really welcome in the workplace. It's better to keep all that stuff private at home and don't put it on your Facebook page. It's just, no.
Yes.
Okay.
You identified an issue that we have found here is that some people are entering into the sciences, especially women, and not having any experience in shop working with materials, welding. So do you have any suggestions?
So we got women coming in, they haven't worked in the shop. I can tell you the guys haven't worked in the shop either.
Right. So as this goes away, and especially as students are trapped in college,
But you see, this whole business of taking hands-on classes out of the school, I think is absolutely the biggest mistake we've ever made, because they teach a practical problem solving. Another thing you learn in all those classes is practical things are never perfect. I've had people come up to me and say, well, can you make a slaughter plant perfect? I said, no, there's nothing in the practical world I can make perfect. Make it really good, but I can't make it perfect. That's just impossible. And it isn't just the women that are having problems with not having doing things. The boys aren't working on the cars either now, the young ones.
do you have suggestions for your students as they enter into college and they haven't had any of these experiences?
Well, one of the things in my livestock handling class, they have to do drawings. And that is a new experience for a lot of students. And about over half my students now are pre-vet and they want to be dog and cat veterinarians. And I thought, I know you don't want to design this cattle chute thing for a ranch, but look at this as a visual problem solving. I'm going to give you certain rules. You're going to have to lay this thing out. It's not multiple choice. It's not fill in the blanks. You're going to have to figure it out. Because I'm finding a lot of students today have a hard time figuring things out. Another assignment I have in that class, because I've had to broaden the appeal, is you got to pick out a narrow subject in animal behavior, something real narrow. And then I want you digging into 4 scientific databases: PubMed, Google Scholar, Web of Knowledge, and Science Direct. Give me 2 journal articles off of each thing, and they might pick out something like acoustic communication in elephants. You know, and in fact, it could be anything. That was one of them. And then I want you to read those 8 journal articles. I don't want you to write a little paragraph like this, just in simple terms. What did you learn from those 8 journal articles? What did you learn from that? You know, how do you synthesize that information together? And because I want to teach them some skills that are going to be really useful. What I'm finding on that assignment, and this my students are mostly undergraduates. For a third of them, it's an easy assignment. And another third, it's like a really good assignment. And for another third, it's probably going to be life-changing skills teaching. Because I'm finding a lot of people don't know how to look stuff up on the internet. I'm seeing a lot of people today who are not very resourceful. They'll say, well, how do I find a college for your kid, for my kid? Well, do you think they even look on the internet? It's sitting right there, and they don't think to look. Yeah, that's right.
Can you talk a little bit more about what is like developing language?
Okay, when I was a little kid, I had the type of language problem where I couldn't get my speech out. And I actually went on a very fancy brain scanner at the University of Pittsburgh that was run by Walter Schneider. That was developed for the Defense Department for head injuries. And they found out that my language output circuit, in other words, speak what I see, only has like a very small amount of the bandwidth. So I had trouble getting language out. Now, in terms of receptive language, if people talked really super fast, it went into gibberish. But if they slowed down and they talked more slowly, then I could hear them. And so I had some receptive language problem and a bad output problem. And it was very frustrating knowing what I wanted to say, and I just couldn't get the words out. And then he worked with me, and they had to kind of push me, and doing a lot of speech therapy, and I got to where I could get my words out. But not being able to communicate is like horribly frustrating.
You talked about the early intervention that you got that helped you with your coping skills and your developing social skills. What sort of hope do you have for the future of treatment for autistic children?
Well, one of the things in the future, we can take the DMS-5 and throw it in the garbage where it belongs. And instead, we'll be using high-speed brain scanning, like this new scanner. It's called High Definition Diffusion Tensor Imaging. I was the first person with autism to get put in it, and the second person was a 65-year-old art professor, PhD in art, to be my control. And within your brain, if you take a formalin-fixed brain and you slice it down here, you can see all these little tiny threads, which are the white matter circuits. You see, all 3/4 of your brain are connector circuits between different parts of the brain. And this is where there's a lot of abnormalities. Now, on the old DTI, if you had 2 white fibers crossed like this, you couldn't tell whether is it an intersection or is it a bridge. You couldn't tell. This thing, you can actually dissect out the circuits. So they dissected out my language circuit, and it was abnormal. And what they're finding matches everything that's showing up clinically. So, okay, kid doesn't talk, you'd be able to find out exactly what the problem is. And then you could target therapy. You can say, well, this social circuit's disconnected, and this, you know, I still had some bandwidth left. I had no bandwidth, it would have been hopeless. Then I would have to learn how to type. There's some people that are nonverbal can learn how to type. But this would make diagnosis precise. I mean, with all your eye disorders, you're probably used to diagnoses that are real precise. The problem you have with, you know, things like autism, dyslexia, ADHD, conduct disorder, I don't even think there should be a diagnosis, is it's not precise. It's a behavioral profile. It's like profiling hijackers. And the other thing that's bad about it is you have doctors sitting around a conference room table deciding to change the diagnoses and get rid of Asperger's and make it social communication disorder. I don't think your eye doctors sit around a conference table and say, well, we're going to call glaucoma something else, you know, or say it doesn't exist. Glaucoma's glaucoma. You know, maybe you'll learn things about treatments, but it's still going to be diagnosed the same way. It's a precise diagnosis.
Yes. As a glaucoma specialist, I like that analogy.
Okay, I didn't realize you were a glaucoma specialist. I just
Perfect.
knew you were an eye doctor.
Perfect.
Okay, ophthalmologist, that's all I knew. Okay.
I'm an engineer here, and I would really like to hear about your design process and what's going through your mind as you design, say, a catalog, what's important to you.
Well, you sort of look at, I'll talk about a design thing I'm working on right now. well, I had a company write to me and working on a thing for holding chicks. They have to, they have an infrared method for taking a little bit off the tip of the beak, and you got to hold the chick. And they put them in this little thing, and they kind of hang in there, and they're kind of going like this. What could you do to make it so the chick wouldn't be so uncomfortable? And I immediately thought of those high chairs they have in restaurants. I just hate those high tables. But they usually have a ring that goes around the base of the chair for you to put your feet on. And I thought, why don't we, this thing rotates around, so why don't we just put a ring around there as a footrest? You know, and I immediately, it just came up in my mind. And my student may be working on this. I said, okay, well, we're going to experiment with a pencil in different places. You know, you just got to you got kind of got to do proof of concept first. And I just immediately just saw it. I said, give the chick a footrest. And it's extremely simple. Let's get some plastic tubing and we'll test this. It's sometimes design ideas just come. And they usually, but the first picture that came up in my mind was a chair, a high chair with a ring footrest. You see, I got the idea from that. Now I have found out that I got extra association fibers back in here. That's the search engine. You know, and I kind of trolled through the database and it just came up. You know, these very, very, very simple design ideas. And you know, then there's other engineering stuff we're going to have to do, but you got to think up the idea. You know, then like on the things I've designed for cattle, when I designed my center track restrainer, we had to make an adjustable side on this thing that would work. And one thing I noticed is that if you adjust the sides down and you pinch the joints right here, the cattle don't really like that very much. So I came up with the idea that as you make it wider, it makes a bigger space for the joint. It adjusts for the joint and the width. And originally we had it pivoted to go the other way. And then I got this brainstorm and I said, install it upside down. And the millwrights weren't very happy about that. And we installed it upside down and it worked. You know, it's a, what kind of engineering are you doing?
Environmental engineering and water treatment.
Water treatment systems, yeah, you've got some mechanical and that's a lot of chemical stuff. And that's stuff that I don't relate to the chemical engineering stuff. I relate more to the mechanical engineering and how it's things I can see. You see, because formally, I'm so bad in math that I can't be an engineer, but I can be an industrial designer. And this is where the industrial designer needs to work with the engineers. Okay, I've got that little part there in my pocket that I was showing you. Well, is that, okay, let's say we make that out of something metal. Is it strong enough to do what it's supposed to do? That's where the engineers are going to have to get in there and work on it. Okay, if that thing had to move like a whole bunch of times, we make it out of, not out of the plastic from the 3D printer, but make it the way we're really going to make it. Is it strong enough? You know, there's a lot of things we'd have to answer. The other thing I'm finding in design is people don't talk to end users. Let me tell you about it. Here's something really awful in design. Shuttle by United. They take perfectly good airline galleys and they rip them out. Perfectly good ones with drink carts and that, and put the stupid dresser drawers in to replace the drink carts with no waterproof thing in there to put ice in. They have to triple bag the ice. I've talked to like 3 flight crews, they just hate them. They were going to bring, they wanted to be like Southwest and serve the drinks on a little cocktail tray like Southwest. Well, they didn't bother to find out that on United you can choose from like 12 different drinks, and on Southwest you have a choice of 3 and they just have them on the tray, because nobody at United bothered to go on Southwest to find out what they actually did. I find it just unbelievable how one corporation doesn't look at another corporation's stuff. It just blows my mind. All they'd have to do to find out what Southwest did is go on 2 or 3 flights and then they'd know. And they didn't do that. People have a tendency to not go out of their own stovepipe. So if you're going to be a designer, look at other stuff. Get ideas from other fields. Don't just read waste management stuff or environmental management stuff. You know, I'd get the technology stuff, the business magazines. You know, read more broadly so you can get ideas. You know, every time I see Shuttle by United, when I go to the restroom in the back of one of those places, I look at those dresser drawers and I'm going, you gotta be kidding. It cost a fortune to tear out perfectly good galleys, put these stupid things in there. And they put the drinks in the dresser drawers. What's this? Stupid.
I'll stop putting drinks in dresser drawers.
Yeah.
Miss, I think we have time for just about one or two more. Yes.
We were talking about different social cues, and you had different things that you learned in the 50s.
Yep.
Here, where you're interacting with people in so many different ways, in person, online, etc. You talk about the experience or what you may want to learn from people on different ends of the spectrum. But what kind of social cues to be?
Well, I don't pick up, the only subtle social cue I pick up is tone of voice. I didn't even know that people had eye signals, little subtle eye signals, so I read about them in a book when I was 50. You know, subtle cues I don't pick up. You know, so if you're in a relationship situation, you just, you know, kind of level with your spouse and say, well, if I'm doing something that really bothers you, like you don't like to snore, or I go like that, or some other thing I do you hate, just tell me. Don't hint. You can't be subtle if I'm doing something that really drives you crazy, because I've gotten better at learning things. It was very difficult for me when I first started designing. When I had a sabotage of equipment on a project, I mean like a meat hook and a conveyor type of sabotage, and it was the engineer that was doing it. You know, a company breaking their own equipment because they got jealous. You know, and I see like plant engineers sitting there like this. I know that's not a good sign. Plant managers hired me. The plant engineer hates me because I'm on his turf and I'm a girl on top of that, so that's really bad. And the thing I've learned on how to deal with that is you got to pull that jealous engineer in, give him a piece of the action, let him design the gate latches or something like that. So he has a little piece of the action, and that stops it. But it was very hard for me, being totally logical, that a high-level employee in a plant would actually break their own equipment because they were jealous of a weird geek that was on their turf. This is the kind of stuff that was very difficult for me to deal with. Back in my 20s and early 30s, I had a very difficult time with this. Now I just chalk it up. It's normal bad behavior. Got to deal with it. So you go, I remember another job I had, we had to rip out the hydraulics the engineer put in because it didn't work. That did not make him happy. And he was an electrician by trade. And he was putting in some new wiring that actually was really nice. And I got to see the inside of the boxes before they closed them up. So I was able to go back down to his office and I said, you know, well, I saw your electrical boxes. They're really nice. That's something I could genuinely give him a compliment. I couldn't give him a compliment on hydraulics. We had to tear it out. But I could give him a compliment on electric boards. And that helped with the jealousy problem. But let me tell you, I used to say, design and engineering is easy. It's the people problems that are hard.
Well, I know that our hour is up, and I just want to say first, I've learned a lot. I particularly learned, I didn't know there was a beef magazine, so I appreciate learning that. And also, I think wine tasting and gourmet dog food looks like another area to explore. So that was
well, you know, the thing, and then Business Week had another article in there, and it was about rare minerals that are mined for making electronics. And it had an iPad frame around a really nasty mine. You learn all kinds of important things. You know, but I think people in education need to be reading some of the business stuff, so that because we got to start thinking more about what is the outcome of education. It's getting and keeping good jobs. We need more people in this country doing stuff, and getting manufacturing back and high-tech manufacturing back, and we have a shortage of the two-year community college degree, which is the you know, computer-aided machinery machinist. You know, we need these kind of people that are kind of quirky and different. Well, I get worried that they're getting labeled handicapped and they're going to go to the basement to play video games rather than go out and design the next iPhone or whatever.
Well, speaking of people doing stuff, you're a person who's done stuff, and we really appreciate all that you've contributed broadly in the world and your great generosity with giving so much of your time to the audience here this afternoon.
Well, I hope we can take some kids that are quirky and different and get them to succeed. And I really commend that you're reaching out to these middle school kids, the high school kids with this 3D printing. We got to show kids interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff.
Fantastic. Let me thank you for your time. And it's been great.